Hey guys, tonight we drift gently into the velvet curtain world of Edwardian England, where the silverware is polished to a mirror shine. The roses are clipped with military precision, and just beyond the wainscoting, there's an unfamiliar click. The chandelier flares on. Too fast, too bright. The maid gasps. The lady of the house touches her temple and murmurs something about nerves. The light switch has been activated, and you probably won't survive this. Yes, tonight we're talking about that most sinister of household innovations, the electric light switch, and why genteel Edwardian ladies, who could gracefully orchestrate dinner for 16 with a flick of their gloved wrist, were absolutely not ready to flick a switch on the wall. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love hearing how far and wide these sleepy little journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in an Edwardian sitting room now. There's velvet everywhere, draped over furniture, tucked into curtains, even swaddling the walls in rich, plum-toned restraint. The fireplace offers a modest glow. Candles flicker like well-mannered ghosts. And then, click, a sudden jolt of brightness erupts overhead. It's electric, unnatural, entirely too bold, and not a single flame to explain it. You glance at Lady Harrowby, perched near the hearth with her embroidery. She doesn't flinch, but her eye twitches, just slightly, enough to suggest she felt something. Something intrusive, like a gentleman entering a room without knocking. See, in the early 1900s, electric lighting was a novelty, and not always a welcome one. Candlelight and gas lamps had bathed homes in a familiar amber gloom for centuries. You could hide things in that darkness. Unsavory facial hair, dusty corners, your cousin Gregory's poor taste in waistcoats. But electric light? It was merciless. Bright, white, clinical. It made your secrets visible. And no one likes that. In many well-off homes, electricity was first installed in only a few rooms, often the dining room, sometimes the hall. Bedrooms were slower to adopt it, and bathrooms. Well, let's just say no one wanted sudden light, revealing one's privates in such a revealing manner. Lady Harrowby lowers her embroidery. She mentions that her neighbor, Mrs. Tillingham, claims electric light causes headaches. It stirs the fluids, she says vaguely, as though the human body were mostly soup. Her maid, Ellen, nods solemnly. She's heard it disrupt sleep. People need darkness, she adds, for thinking and digesting. Hard to argue. And it wasn't just superstition. Early electric lighting was harsh. Bulbs burned at odd temperatures. Some flickered like haunted lighthouses. The first light switches, often chunky toggles or push buttons, weren't exactly ergonomic. And once you press one, bam, the light snapped on. No gentle fade. No charming flicker. It was like someone dropped a spotlight on your daily unraveling. Historians still argue whether the discomfort stemmed more from the technology itself or from its symbolic disruption. Imagine being raised to believe that lighting a room involved matches, wax, wicks, caution. Now you're told to just poke the wall with your bare hand. For Edwardian ladies, raised to associate decorum with effort. That was like asking the queen to shout for ketchup. It wasn't just undignified. It was suspiciously easy. Some feared that the new lights would make them look ill. One fashionable diary from 1904 laments, "The electric glow gives my skin the pallor of cheese rind." Harsh, and not entirely inaccurate. Others were simply unnerved by the immediacy. You didn't ease into electric light. It hit you like a scandal. Maids stumbled when switching it on. Guests shielded their eyes. Children cried. One enterprising vicar allegedly asked his parishioners to pray for the soul of the hallway lamp, which flares like Lucifer at every touch. You step now into a long corridor of the Harrowby home, recently rewired. The wallpaper is floral and a little faded. A single bulb dangles from the ceiling. Next to it, that dreaded innovation, the wall switch. It's mounted chest-high, with a bone-white button that protrudes like a tiny, unblinking eye. Lady Harrowby refuses to touch it. "It feels," she confides, "a bit medical, like something you press just before being strapped to a gurney. This discomfort wasn't limited to the ladies, of course. Men were skeptical too, but they had the privilege of channeling their fear into interest. They studied wiring diagrams and spoke loudly about currents and voltage. Ladies were expected to be delicate, so when they disliked the light switch, it became framed as feminine fragility. Not, completely valid discomfort with electricity shooting through their walls. One curious fringe belief even warned that pressing a light switch with wet fingers could summon tiny shocks, which, to be fair, occasionally happened. Early systems weren't exactly known for consistency or insulation. And then there was a sound, that faint click, a soft but certain judgment. You could be across the room and hear someone activate the light, as if the house itself were keeping score. Flick, another choice made. Flick, another secret revealed. Flick, another candlestick forced into retirement. There's something intimate about lighting a space. You used to need fire. Now all you need is one tap. It's convenient, sure, but also too fast, too clean, too modern. You picture a lady alone in her boudoir, reaching for that switch. What if she activates it too quickly, too eagerly? What would that say about her? Would she seem fast? A woman who doesn't mind exposing herself to the full brilliance of technology? A woman who embraces the modern world with just a little too much enthusiasm? Better, perhaps, to let the maid do it. So you leave the corridor behind, heading toward the parlor again. You pass a tray of extinguished candles. Some burn low, others barely touched. A reminder of what's been lost in the age of the wall switch. The ritual, the glow, the excuse to linger in the half-light. You pause before another switch. This one disguised beneath a doily and a framed picture of King Edward VII. Subtle, classy, but still, when you press it, the click is unforgiving. The room flares to life. And somewhere in the hush of modern light, a nervous Edwardian lady clutches her pearls just a little tighter. You're still standing in the hallway of that stately Edwardian home, your hand freshly withdrawn from the switch you just dared to press. The light now shines down in a perfectly cold cone, illuminating everything from the lace trim on the nearest ottoman to the faint spider crack in the ceiling paint. There's no denying it. The room is undeniably lit. But whether that's a triumph or a tragedy depends entirely on whom you ask. Enter the light switch. This little wall-mounted demon didn't always exist in its now familiar form. In fact, the earliest versions were so rudimentary and strange that you might have mistaken them for a bell pull or an experimental doorbell. Some looked like small metal levers. Others required you to twist a knob to send power to the bulb, like some forbidden ritual from a Victorian alchemist lab. And what did it replace? An entire world of light management. Before switches, if you want to change the light, you call for someone, usually a servant, who had to strike a match, tend to a wick, and trim the flame like a gardener in your own personal sunset. Light was something coaxed into being, not just flipped on like a tap. But around the turn of the century, electric power began seeping into upper-class homes like a polite but persistent butler who just wouldn't go away. Wealthy families didn't just want modern convenience. They wanted the right kind of modern convenience. Gas lights were still common, but they were finicky, dangerous, known to hiss, and occasionally explode. Enter electricity, fresh from the exhibition halls, and lectures of suited men with truly unfortunate facial hair. The switch, then, was a human interface with this new power. It was a symbol, a control point, a terrifying portal into the glowing world of tomorrow. One push, and the entire ceiling would blaze like a miniature sun. For the first time in human history, light didn't require effort. It demanded only nerve. Some of the earliest switches didn't even look like switches. In the 1890s, the most common type was a pull chain mechanism attached to the bulb itself. Imagine reaching up in the dark, groping blindly toward the ceiling for a dangling thread, which, let's be honest, in any other context would scream spider. Eventually, engineers figured out that placing control on the wall made more sense. But with that breakthrough came something else entirely. Panic. Historians still argue whether the switch itself caused anxiety, or if it simply became the scapegoat for a wider dread about electricity invading the home. After all, a gas lamp was still visible. You saw it light. You heard it hiss. With a switch, the cause and effect felt unholy. Press a button here, and light happens over there. It was modern sorcery. And worse, you could do it alone, without assistance, without ceremony. That was a big deal in an age obsessed with protocol. The moment a lady pressed her own switch, she was admitting, quietly, rebelliously, that she didn't need a servant to light her room, that she was participating in technology. Some called it progress. Others whispered it might lead to socialism. The architecture of the switch itself didn't help calm things down. Many early models were big, clunky things, made of black bakelite or ceramic, sometimes rimmed in brass. They clicked loudly, like the snap of a mousetrap. And don't forget, at this point, most people still weren't totally convinced that electricity wasn't going to jump out and bite them. There's even a particularly famous case from 1906 where a light switch was blamed for a fainting spell. A lady Brackenden reportedly collapsed after pressing a switch the first time and witnessing an instantaneous chandelier blaze to life. Her physician wrote that the excitement of the moment and unexpected visual stimuli triggered a brief but total nervous eclipse. In other words, the lights came on and she went out. Of course, not everyone feared the switch. Some saw it as a party trick. Children in particular delighted in it. In one household account, a young boy was scolded for switching the hallway light on and off so many times. It created what his governess described as a strobe effect most unbecoming to supper. Hard to argue with that. The societal confusion around the light switch even bled into the arts. Several plays of the Edwardian era included gags where a character unfamiliar with switches gestured grandly at one and ended up illuminating the wrong room, exposing a romantic tryst, or startling the butler into dropping the tea tray. You know, a classic. But still, the unease persisted. Electrical engineers tried to ease concerns by designing switches that looked gentler. One failed prototype resembled a porcelain rose bedew pressed softly inward. Lovely in theory. Less lovely when it broke apart mid-use and sent tiny ceramic petals flying across the room like shrapnel from a very delicate war. Others leaned into visibility. The bell switch, for example, had a prominent circular plate and a loud ping when pressed. The idea was to make the act of switching so noticeable, so declarative, that users would feel like they were initiating something official, like filing taxes, but with light. Of course, none of this stopped the march of progress. Electric lighting, with its unsettling immediacy, took over home after home. The switch became more standard, more discreet, less prone to explosive side effects. But in these early years, every press of that button was a miniature existential crisis, a reminder that the world was changing, that ritual was being replaced with convenience, that shadows were losing their stronghold, and that a simple lady alone in her drawing room might now wield power once reserved for Prometheus, with just a touch. You wander now toward the morning room, where breakfast is sometimes served beneath a stained glass dome. A light switch waits beside the doorway. It's smoother than the others, housed in glossy ivory. You press it. The dome glows. No hissing. No fuss. Just light. And yet, for a moment, you still half expect someone to gasp behind you. The dome in the morning room glows with a soft halo of light now, and for a brief moment, you imagine you've done something deeply improper. Not scandalous exactly, just a little too efficient. The room fills with brightness faster than your shadow can disappear, and you're left blinking not from the light itself, but from the eerie quiet that follows. No match strike, no rustle of skirts, no drawn-out ceremony. Just click. Illumination. Of course, by this point in Edwardian society, not everyone had this luxury. You're part of a very specific class if you can afford the flick of a switch. Most rural homes were still years away from wiring. Even many in the working class were still wrestling with gas mantles and oil lamps. But here, in homes like Lady Harrowby's, it wasn't just about light. It was about the right kind of light delivered with fashionable restraint and modern flair. If you could stomach the implications, There's a lingering fear in the air, not of fire or burglars or anything you could shout about. No, this is a quieter fear, a fear of transparency. Electric light reveals everything. The threadbare cushions, the hairline cracks in the cornice, the unflattering yellow undertones in your skin. It shows you too much. And worse, it shows you too clearly. The ladies of the Edwardian elite had spent lifetimes mastering the art of soft presentation. A gentle candlelit glow made complexions appear creamy, eyes more luminous, and wrinkles virtually invisible. Gaslight offers similar effect, albeit with more sneezing. But electric light? Electric light didn't lie. One particularly vivid quote from a 1908 letter reads, "I find myself entirely without shadows. My dress appears vulgar in its glare, and I believe I may have startled the cat into a new personality. The tone is flippant, but the concern is real, because suddenly your home doesn't just shelter you, it exposes you." Historians still argue whether the Edwardian aversion to electric light was merely aesthetic or if it betrayed deeper anxieties about class, privacy, and control. After all, gaslight had its quirks, but obeyed a logic people understood. Electric light, on the other hand, was invisible until it wasn't, and that made it suspicious. In some cases, homeowners actively resisted installing electric switches. There are records of elegant townhomes where electricity was wired into the walls, but the actual switches were hidden behind curtains or faux cabinets, lest a guest mistake one for a call bell or, heaven forbid, use it without supervision. Yes, people had designated switch operators. Entire butler instructions on how to properly activate the drawing room illumination without spooking the guests or washing out the wallpaper. Imagine that for a second, an upper-crust dinner party. All roast goose and aspic and jewel-toned gowns, and in the corner, a butler waits like a coiled spring, poised to press the dining room switch just as the soup arrives. Timing was everything. Then again, not every electric experiment went as planned. Take the case of the Tiverton tulip disaster of 1909, when newly wired conservatory was flooded with unfiltered light during a garden party. 100 hand-raised tulips, bred for delicate semi-shade, instantly began to wilt before the guests' eyes. Lady Tiverton fainted. The gardener quit on the spot. The Times referred to the event as a tragedy of illumination. There's a reason, after all, why designers of the era began to add tinted glass covers and silk lampshades, anything to tone down the harsh clarity of early electric bulbs. Some families even tried to mimic the amber glow of gaslight using tinted bulbs, though these often hummed or flickered just enough to keep guests nervous. And let's talk about the noise. We think of electric light today as silent, but early systems could be audibly alive. A low buzz, a faint crackle, enough to make you wonder if the walls were humming secrets. This is no doubt why so many Edwardian ladies would tiptoe past a glowing bulb as though it might speak. Some even believe that the light itself could alter one's temperament. A pseudo-scientific pamphlet from 1910 warned that prolonged exposure to artificial illumination may induce melancholia or irritability in women of nervous disposition. The author, a Dr. Thaddeus M. Quain, whom no one remembers for anything else, also suggested that electric light could drain the vital feminine aura, whatever that means. The fear was entirely without foundation. The first electric bulbs did emit ultraviolet radiation. Some gave off a kind of ozone smell, like a thunderstorm happening behind the wallpaper. And the insulation around early wiring was sometimes made of fabric. Yes, fabric. A choice that was both charming and flammable. It wasn't just the light, either. It was what came with it. Wiring required walls to be opened, wallpaper to be slashed, beams to be drilled through. You're not just adding convenience. You're violating the sanctity of the home. One society lady compared the rewiring of her townhouse to surgery without anesthesia. Another described it as allowing tiny mechanical veins to invade my domestic heart. Still, the march of the modern era could not be stopped. By 1911, it was considered slightly gauche not to have some electric lighting in one's residence, especially in London. The Savoy Hotel had fully electric rooms as early as the 1890s, and the wealthy socialites wanted to keep pace no matter how much they squinted in protest. You step now into a side parlor, unlit for now. There's a rug embroidered with vines, and a chaise lounge that looks soft enough to swallow you whole. On the wall, the switch sits unobtrusively, set into a brass plate with dainty screws. You press it, and this time, the light that fills the room isn't harsh. It's gentle, filtered, a soft glow bulb inside a pink silk shade. You breathe out. See? Progress isn't always terrifying. But just as you sit down, a portrait on the wall catches your eye. A stern Edwardian matron glares out beneath a lace cap. Her eyes seem to say, "In my day, we used tapers." You believe her, and you almost feel guilty for liking the switch at all. Almost. The lady in the portrait continues to glower as if your enjoyment of soft electric light is a personal affront, but you don't apologize. You settle deeper into the velvet upholstery, the room aglow in a way that would horrify her, yes, but also keep her from tripping over the ottoman, which she absolutely would have done, considering the clutter of Victorian furnishings that lingers even in these early Edwardian years. Fern stands, footstools, embroidered screens, all designed for beauty, not navigability. And this is where the drama of the light switch takes on a new stage, the domestic battlefield. Because as more homes installed electrical systems, the disagreements began to crackle not in the wires but between the people using them. One pressing issue, when to turn the lights on, and how bright they ought to be. It's 1907, and a respectable dinner party is underway. The host wants every room alight, a demonstration of modern superiority. His wife insists on subdued illumination, just a single bulb on near the stair. The butler, used to oil lamps, keeps slipping into the pantry to correct the brightness levels. Meanwhile, a guest accidentally turns off the hallway sconces, plunging a lady into a near-comic fall down 3 steps. Everyone blames the switch. Historians still debate whether these disputes were truly about lighting preferences or symbolic turf wars in the home. Was the lady of the house resisting her husband's authority, or the threat of losing control to a mechanized future? Was the butler really concerned with ambience, or just desperately clinging to a fading role as illumination overlord? By 1910, etiquette manuals had started including entire sections on the management of the modern drawing room, with curious advice like, "Do not allow lighting controls to be visible to guests." It was a golden rule of Edwardian interior design. You can have electricity, but don't let anyone see how it works. So switches were disguised, hidden behind silk curtains, masked as painted panels. Some were installed at floor level, so they could be operated discreetly with the toe of a slipper. Imagine that. A lady entering a room, pausing ever so slightly to gently nudge a wall with her foot, click, and pretending she had nothing to do with the sudden ambience. Not everyone bought into the mystique. Children, especially, found the whole thing hilarious. Letters from governesses complained about unauthorized switching, especially in bedrooms and hallways. One boy in Sussex reportedly swapped the light switches with the bell pulls, leading to a week of frustrated servants sprinting to rooms that needed only illumination. And then there were the pranks. Edwardian teenage boys were not above rewiring switches to control unexpected rooms. There's a glorious account of a country house gathering in which a guest attempted to light her dressing table and instead ignited the exterior lanterns of the carriage drive. She was too embarrassed to mention it, and her host never knew. Of course, not all the consequences were so charming. There were real dangers. Poor insulation, faulty connections, untrained electricians. Remember, this was a world still learning what electricity was, let alone how to tame it. And switches, as the most visible part of the system, bore the brunt of the fear. People began to treat switches as if they were cursed objects. Some avoided touching them directly, using a glove or folded handkerchief. Others preferred to ask a servant. And in at least one documented case, a household employed a dedicated lighting maid, whose only job was to manage the electric switches at appointed times. Then came the question of how electricity would affect not just individuals, but relationships. Couples used to sit in quiet firelight, reading or dozing. Now, they could fill the room with glaring clarity. One social critic claimed this was damaging to the natural rhythms of marital harmony. Translation: no one could fake sleep anymore. Theories abounded. Some said electric light discouraged daydreaming. that its constant brightness promoted insomnia and urban restlessness. In contrast to gaslight's gentle flicker, electricity was seen as too clinical, too exposing. A writer in The Lady's Companion worried that if the family's shadows are always banished, shall we still know when to rest? You stroll now through the morning room's connecting hallway, where the wallpaper still sports the faint yellow stain of long-dead gas sconces. There's a switch here, too, smaller than the last and quieter. You press it without thinking, and that's the real shift. Somewhere between 1900 and 1915, the switch began to vanish, not from walls, but from consciousness. It stopped being a marvel and became part of the background. That's when the fear started to fade, too, not because it was resolved, but because people got used to it. That's the Edwardian way, really. You don't face your fear. You domesticate it. Still, even in that domestication, quirks remained. A switch installed in a nursery might be designed so a child couldn't reach it, or so that they could, and thus feel modern and independent. Debates raged about the age at which a young lady should be trusted to manage her own lighting. 9? 12? Never? Some families develop elaborate rules. No switching after 10 p.m. Or only mama touches the corridor lights. Like light was some kind of high-calorie indulgence. There are notes from a Miss Cleary's school for proper young ladies outlining how each pupil was to receive one switch credit per evening. No one ever explains what happened if you borrowed someone else's. You reach another room, this one unlit, cool and quiet. It smells faintly of beeswax and old books. The kind of place where an over-enthusiastic switch might shatter the mood like a dropped tea tray. And yet there it is again, the little button near the door, waiting. You press it. Light spreads slowly this time, filtered through amber glass and fringed shades. There's a gentleness to it now. The future, perhaps, doesn't have to be so harsh. But still, you wonder, did Lady Harrowby ever stop being afraid of it? Or did she simply stop saying so aloud? The room you've just illuminated feels like a secret, not in a dramatic, spy novel way, more like a nook the house itself forgot about. A writing desk slouches under a curtain of lace, and a faint shimmer of dust dances in the filtered glow. You imagine someone here once writing thank you notes by gaslight, perhaps with a shawl over her shoulders and strong opinions about proper illumination. Because let's be honest, no matter how elegant the electric switch was supposed to be, Edwardian women had opinions. And they weren't just aesthetic. They were fiercely practical. You lived in a world where running a household was a full-time strategic operation, and light, its source, quality, and cost, was part of the game. For women who managed domestic economies, electricity was both thrilling and suspect. It promised convenience but threatened expense. It saved time but demanded trust in men with screwdrivers and mustaches calling themselves electricians. Take the case of Mrs. Leonard Ashcombe, who famously documented her house's electrification in her diaries. She wrote, "The switch in the scullery functions perfectly well, and yet I am reluctant to stand within arm's reach when it is used. I do not doubt its capacity, only its intentions. You can almost hear her muttering, 'I don't like the way it looks at me.'" And she wasn't alone. Many Edwardian ladies feared the electric switch not because it was mechanical, but because it was too simple. You push a button, and invisible energy streaks into life, without a hiss, without a flame, without permission. It felt unnatural, almost impolite. Historians still argue whether this discomfort was rooted in gender norms or just garden variety superstition. After all, women had been handling oil lamps and gaslight with grace for decades, but now they were asked to interact with something invisible, unpredictable, and not be afraid. That's not how fear works. You can't just replace it with voltage and expect everyone to smile. And if you were a woman running a modern Edwardian home, you also had to consider what others might say. There was a real anxiety about what neighbors thought of one's technological choices. In social circles, conversations about the switch were often less about engineering and more about social strategy. "Oh, we've had it installed, but we still keep the sconces for dinner. Yes, my husband insists on it, but I find candlelight more forgiving. I only use it in the hallway. The drawing room must breathe." Code words, all of them. Translations, I don't trust it. It shows my pores. It's too American. Ah, yes, the Americans. Always the wild cards. Across the Atlantic, people embraced switches and sockets with fearless enthusiasm. Whole skyscrapers were lit up like stage sets. New York homes had electric mixers, electric toasters, even electric fans, while London households still debated whether a hallway bulb might startle the dog. One columnist in the Illustrated London News huffed that American women seemed quite content to bask in artificial blaze, as if they had no modesty to protect. Oof! Tell us how you really feel. Meanwhile, British manufacturers scrambled to design switches that wouldn't offend. Enter the Bakelite beauty. A smooth, glossy toggle switch with just enough ornamentation to look intentional, but not enough to scandalize your aunt. It became a status symbol, especially among the newly wealthy, those eager to prove they belonged in the glow-up crowd, if not the blue blood registries. You pause now by a set of stairs, narrow, mahogany-railed, and lit by a single amber bulb hanging like a sleeping bee. There's a switch here, too, tucked just beside the banister. For a moment, you imagine your gloved fingers hesitating over it, as if you're about to commit a minor trespass. But the room is silent. And so, like generations of nervous debutantes before you, you flick it. The stairwell brightens gently. Nothing sparks. Nothing crackles. You smile. Victory. But don't celebrate just yet. You still haven't met the night switchers. These were women, mainly mistresses of the house, who took it upon themselves to monitor the house's electrical usage after dark. They would patrol the halls, switch by switch, ensuring no light burned needlessly, no bulb glowed unwatched. Some carried ledgers to mark which rooms had used excess energy. Others insisted on bedtime inspections where children were required to show their extinguished lights before receiving a good night peck. One story tells of Lady Winthrop, who so distrusted her husband's casual switch use that she had copper counters installed, devices that tracked every switch engagement. He retaliated by reading by candlelight in the billiard room. She counter-retaliated by locking away the matches. Romance is complicated. These acts may seem petty now, but in context, they were forms of negotiation. Domestic power was shifting, literally and metaphorically, for women whose influence had long been rooted in household management. The electrification of their world meant adapting to a new kind of authority. You could no longer see every moving part. You had to trust it, or, more often, find ways to control it anyway. The funniest part? The real fear wasn't even electricity, it was a change. The unspoken, humming revolution that rewired everything. Routines, gestures, rituals. What was once a quiet, candlelit ritual, dimming the lights for evening tea, became a button press. A servant no longer needed. A new silence, less romantic, more efficient. You reach the top of the stairs and step onto a thick carpet, its floral weave cushioning your steps. The landing ahead is softly lit, but you notice a small black switch near a closed door. Just a bump in the paneling, really barely visible. You press it. The bulb overhead dims, then flickers out. You stand in darkness now, not from fear, but out of choice. Because, as Lady Harrowby once mused in a letter to her sister, there is still comfort in darkness if one chooses it deliberately. And here you are, choosing, light, dark, or something in between. You linger in that hallway darkness just a little longer. It's a comfortable sort of quiet, the kind that settles in after the lamps are off, but before the fire's gone out. You can almost hear the soft crackle of old wallpaper, the creak of the house breathing. And you think, not for the first time, how strange it is that fear used to live in such a small thing. A button, a switch. But the Edwardians didn't see it as small. Especially not the upper-class ladies, who were expected to maintain order, elegance, and social poise even when confronted with what they genuinely believed might electrocute them at any moment. And no environment demanded more poise than the formal drawing room. Let's step inside one. Carpet so, plus your shoes vanish. Walls of patterned silk, maybe something tasteful in sage and rose. And center stage, a chandelier that looks like a spaceship from a parallel dimension where doilies reign supreme. Hanging from a ceiling rosette larger than most garden ponds. It's wide with, yes, electric light. Now, imagine being told to turn it on in front of guests. A full chandelier. 36 bulbs. At once. And everyone watching. You would hesitate too. That's why, in many households, switches were strategically hidden or assigned to servants. The lady of the house could then enter already aglow, as if lit by divinity, rather than seen reaching awkwardly behind a curtain to flip a toggle like some common sorceress. Appearances, darling. And this is the period when lighting starts to become performance. You begin to see illumination events in private homes. Parties where the act of lighting a room is timed for maximum effect. Picture this. The guests arrive, remove their gloves, sip sherry, and just as conversation lulls, click. The drawing room blooms in golden light. Gaslight never had that flair. No drama, just a hiss and a cough. Historians still debate whether this theatrical turn was spontaneous or a calculated social maneuver. Was it a way to distract from the eerie silence left by servants displaced by electric systems? Or a method for upper-class families to reassert power through technological spectacle? Because here's the irony. Electric light gave women more freedom in some ways. Later hours, safer streets, better visibility for tasks. But it also introduced a whole new layer of expectation. No longer was it enough to simply light a room. Now, you had to curate its glow. Enter the lighting designer. Not the ones we have today with tool belts and CAD software. No, these were typically fashionable women, self-declared experts, who began consulting one another on light temperatures and ambience balance. They didn't have those words yet, of course, but the instincts were the same. For example, there was Lady Pendlebury. Yes, her again, who wrote an entire pamphlet titled On the Appropriate Dimming of a Dining Space. Her tips included covering bulbs with layers of tinted parchment, turning on no more than 3 lamps at once, and never illuminating a guest from below, lest you instigate unkind shadows across the nose. She had rules for hallway light, soft, boudoir light, warmer, and bathroom light, never to be discussed in company. She once turned down a marriage proposal because her suitor had recently installed ceiling lights. Ceiling lights. As if she were a book in a library to be examined from above. Not everyone had her discipline. Some homes, especially in the suburbs, went in the opposite direction. Full lighting in every room, all day, all night. It was a way of proving something. We're modern now. We're not afraid. We can afford the bill. And bills were no joke. The electric companies weren't regulated much in the beginning, so charges could be wildly inconsistent. Some families paid by the bulb, others by the hour. There are letters where Edwardian ladies complained that the drawing room switch was unreliable, not because it malfunctioned, but because its use was noticed by the household accountant. So here comes a fringe solution. Fake switches. Yes, truly. Decoy switches were installed in some rooms to create the illusion of modernity without the expense. Guests would enter a room, see the toggle, assume electricity was available, and never dare test it. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, candles flickered behind frosted glass to simulate bulbs. It was like gaslight cosplay. And we haven't even touched on the fashion response. With brighter lighting came a horrifying revelation. Some dresses didn't hold up under electric scrutiny. What looked elegant in candlelight suddenly appeared wrinkled, cheap, or worse, translucent. Milliners and dressmakers began marketing electric-ready fabrics, designed to glow rather than glare. Some gowns were even embroidered with metallic threads to reflect light delicately. It was the dawn of ambient fashion. One fringe tidbit from 1912. A London boutique sold a line of switchable cloaks, with interior panels that changed color depending on the room's lighting. The advertisements promised glamour under any wattage. Historians still argue whether this was clever innovation or just very determined snake oil. Meanwhile, in country homes, the relationship with electric switches remained cautious. A switch near the library might be used once a week, always with a pause. Some households installed muffled switches, devices designed to click silently so as not to disturb readers. One estate owner wrote, "The sound of a switch reminds me of a pistol trigger. We do not like to be startled at dusk." Even the servants developed their own protocols. Some valets refused to use switches in front of guests, believing it would appear uncouth. Others found ways to manipulate the light from a distance, using strings or cleverly placed mirrors, so their masters could live in the illusion that rooms lit themselves. And speaking of illusions, remember that chandelier in the drawing room? It turns out many of those weren't real. Or rather, they weren't fully functional. A large percentage of ornate light fixtures in Edwardian homes were purely decorative, wired to a single bulb at the center, while the outer arms remained hollow. All glamour, minimal glow. So next time you marvel at a grand antique chandelier, just remember, it might have been more showpiece than spotlight. The electric switch didn't just light rooms. It also lit egos, secrets, insecurities, and occasional parlor trick. You reach the end of this quiet wing and notice a lamp on a side table. Its shade tilted slightly, like it's had a long night. You glance around. The switch is on the cord, not the wall. An update, perhaps. Or maybe just a compromise. A nod to the past, with one eye on the future. You thumb the cord gently. Light returns. And with it, the soft certainty that, no matter how small the switch, it's never just a button. It's a choice. A symbol. And once upon a time, for a very nervous lady with a corseted waist and excellent posture, it was a daily act of courage. You leave the drawing room behind, its whispers of chiffon and flickering social anxieties, and step into a quieter space, the Edwardian boudoir. Not the scandalous kind. Mind you, this is more tea tray than thigh highs, more lavender sachets than sultry jazz. The personal retreat of the fashionable lady, where fears of electric switches met their most delicate battleground. The bedside lamp. You can almost see it. A dainty table against the wall, a stack of well-thumbed poetry books, and beside them, a lamp shaped like a flower vase wearing a ruffled bonnet. But it's not the lamp that catches your eye. It's the small black switch just beneath the shade. A tiny, twisted thing that looks like it might buzz or hiss or summon spirits. You hesitate before touching it, and for a moment, you're right there with her. The Edwardian woman lying in bed, terrified that flipping this little nub might fry her hairnet. Because in the boudoir, electric light was personal, intimate, vulnerable. It wasn't about dazzling guests anymore. It was about safety, comfort, and trust. And those were precisely the things early electricity struggled to offer. You see, most boudoirs in upper-class homes weren't immediately outfitted with full electric systems. The wiring often lagged behind the main social rooms by months or even years. Some women requested it stay that way, preferring their gas sconces and oil lamps to the unsettling hum of new currents. Others accepted the change begrudgingly, installing switches with ceramic caps, double-fuse circuits, and thick velvet curtains just in case anything decided to spark. Historians still debate whether these fears were exaggerated or entirely rational. After all, electric fires did happen. And worse, electric shocks weren't yet fully understood. There are written accounts of ladies feeling tingles through metallic bed frames or watching their jewelry heat slightly while lying near a switched-on lamp. These tales drifted through drawing rooms like ghost stories, often ending with a gasp and the words, "And she still turned it off herself." The boudoir also gave birth to a curious genre of switch design, the ornamental disguise. Some switches were built into porcelain figurines, with a toggle hidden behind a shepherd's crook or ceramic cat's ear. Others were encased in velvet boxes lined with lace, as if to soothe the nerves before contact. The idea was to trick the mind into thinking it wasn't dangerous, just a lovely decoration, a Trojan horse of gentle design. One particularly quirky example comes from the Marchioness of Alvington, who commissioned a custom switch shaped like a seashell. The bulb's filament resembled a pearl, and the whole thing was presented on a silver tray by her maid each evening. It was said she refused to touch it until she had completed her nightly courage tea, a special blend of chamomile, rosehip, and something only her apothecary knew. But beyond the switch itself, the boudoir light changed sleep culture. Before electricity, women often went to bed with candles or relied on the last glow of the hearth. Now, they could read longer, write letters embroidered by artificial light, or, heaven forbid, reflect. And in those extra hours of glow came a lot of thinking. Some ladies began journaling obsessively. Others reported strange dreams. Doctors at the time warned of electric fatigue, a supposed nervous condition brought on by too much nighttime illumination. Of course, historians now suggest it was probably just insomnia or low-grade anxiety. Still, There was something slightly sinister about the way the boudoir light lingered. Bright, but not warm, always humming just below perception. To combat this, boudoir designers turned to colored shades. Amber glass, peach silk, and pale lavender were all popular, casting a softer tone that mimicked the comfort of candlelight. Some women claimed they could tell whether a lamp had a violet shade just by how their skin looked in the mirror. One 1909 beauty column advised readers to always dim the lamp before applying night cream, lest you observe yourself too plainly and spoil the mood. And speaking of mirrors, those became controversial too. Electric light revealed every detail. Wrinkles, redness, powder out of place. The electric mirror, as it was sometimes called, was seen by some as a liberator and by others as a cruel informant. One society journal joked that electric bulbs in boudoirs should come with a chaperone, lest the lady's illusions be shattered before breakfast. Fashion responded accordingly. Nightwear began to shimmer. Designers marketed electro-sheen nightgowns made from fabrics that flattered under incandescent light. There were even advertisements for bed linens that sparkled modestly in the glow of civilized bulbs. It was all about reclaiming control, turning electric vulnerability into style. Still, not everyone bought in. In smaller towns, many women continued to place a candle near the bed, just in case. The candle was a companion, something warm and organic. You could watch it dance side beside it, trust it not to betray you. An electric bulb, on the other hand, felt distant, cold, unforgiving. One fringe story from the Lake District. A widow named Mrs. Witherington refused electricity in her bedroom until 1924. Her reason? She believed the light kept her late husband's ghost from visiting. He doesn't care for that buzz, she told neighbors. It frightens him off. Whether that's charming or deeply spooky is up to you. There's also the matter of timing. Before electricity, you woke and slept by natural cues. Roosters' bells, sunlight. But the electric boudoir dissolved those boundaries. A woman could stay awake at midnight writing love letters or take a bath at dawn if she liked. There was both freedom and risk in that, the soft rebellion of autonomy. Of course, freedom always invites judgment. There were moral panics about women staying up too late. Some advice pamphlets suggested that unstructured hours led to wandering minds and scandalous thoughts. There's no hard data on the scandal rate per bulb, but we do know that Victorian bedtime rituals were meant to soothe and contain. The Edwardian electric night, by contrast, whispered, "Do as you please." Historians still argue whether this shift in bedroom lighting marked the start of real independence for women in domestic spaces, or whether it simply replaced one set of restrictions with another, trading curfews for currents. But tonight, here in this fictional boudoir, the hum is barely noticeable. The lamp with its faint lavender shade casts a drowsy dome over the room. You can almost hear the rustle of a silk dressing gown, the slow exhale of someone who's not quite ready to sleep. And there, next to the pillows, is the switch. It's no longer something to fear, but it's still treated with reverence. A pause, a breath, a decision. Your hand moves toward it. Soft click, darkness again. And in that moment, as your eyes adjust, you feel the weight of 100 years of bedtime courage. Tucked gently beneath the covers, humming just under the hush. From the boudoir's quiet flicker, you drift into the kitchen, an unlikely theater where electricity's arrival sparked its own peculiar drama. It's not the glamour of chandeliers or the whispered fears of bedside lamps here, but a gritty, practical challenge. The Edwardian kitchen was an arena of transformation, where ancient hearts met crackling currents, and where the humble electric switch began to rewrite domestic labor. Imagine stepping inside a room heavy with the scent of fresh bread, with smoke and boiled cabbage. The walls might be tiled in plain white, stained by years of stew spills, and the ceiling low enough to make you duck. Hanging from one corner, an electric bulb swings awkwardly on a bare wire. Its switch a simple toggle near the door. Unlike the drawing room's hidden buttons, here the switch was a tool worn, scuffed, and handled by rough hands. But electric light in the kitchen was more than illumination. It was a revolution. Suddenly, cooks could extend their working hours, baking after dusk without fear of open flames. The electric stove was still a dream for most, but the glow of bulbs already signaled change. The introduction of electric switches in kitchens, however, was met with mixed reactions from the household staff. Servants often viewed the new technology with suspicion. After all, these were the same people who'd spent lifetimes mastering fire and gaslight, knowing precisely how to coax flames and avoid burns. A cold, buzzing switch was unpredictable. One maid, young Elsie, reportedly refused to touch the kitchen light switch alone for weeks after it was installed. Fearing a shock of the devil, her hesitation was common. Some servants developed elaborate rituals, knocking 3 times before flipping the switch or touching the metal plate with a cloth, to ward off bad luck. Historians still argue whether these superstitions were born of genuine fear or simply resistance to change imposed by the upper classes. After all, electricity in the kitchen symbolized both progress and the erosion of traditional roles. If machines could bake bread or light ovens, what then of the servants? A quirky side note. In some Edwardian kitchens, you find 2 switches near each other, one real, one a decoy. The decoy switch often controlled nothing but a small nightlight or a signal bell for servants, while the real switch was hidden or locked away. This trickery maintained the illusion of control, while protecting the expensive electrical fixtures from overuse or misuse. And then there were the accidents. One well-documented incident involved a chef who, distracted by a boiling pot, flipped the kitchen light switch only to cause a brief electrical fire that singed his eyebrows. Tales like these circulated widely and added to the kitchen's aura of danger and unpredictability. By the mid-1910s, electric switches began to be standardized, becoming sturdier and safer. Yet the transition was slow. Many kitchens retained their gas lamps or oil lamps for years, sometimes running both systems side by side like reluctant roommates. The electrification of the kitchen also altered the domestic soundscape. Where once crackling fire and the clatter of pots dominated, now there was a steady hum of wires, the click of switches, and sometimes a faint buzz. For some, it was unsettling, a reminder that the household was no longer powered by human hands alone. Fashion, predictably, paid little attention here. It was a realm of aprons and sturdy shoes. But even here, electric lighting changed behavior. Cooks reported feeling less tired and more alert during evening shifts, which shifted the rhythms of household management. One fringe story claims that a certain Edwardian cook experimented with attaching small colored glass covers over kitchen bulbs to soften the harsh white light, hoping it would improve the flavor of the food. While historians still debate the plausibility of this culinary quirk, it highlights the era's fascination with how light influences not just mood but matter. The kitchen's electric switch was never glamorous, but it was a symbol of profound social and technological change. It bridged centuries of tradition and the dawning modern world, flicking on more than just bulbs. It switched on new ideas about work, class, and domesticity. As you step back from the stove and the softly buzzing switch, you carry with you the echo of those kitchens, where fear, hope, and human hands met a simple, glowing button. Leaving behind the bustling kitchen, you wander into the library, a sanctuary where silence was golden and electric switches had their own nuanced presence. Here, in this hushed realm of leather-bound tomes and velvet armchairs, the arrival of electric light was not a mere convenience, but a subtle shift in atmosphere and etiquette. Picture the scene. Heavy curtains drawn against the evening chill, a fire crackling low on the hearth, and the faint scent of old paper mingling with polished wood. Against this backdrop, the electric switch perched discreetly near the doorway, usually mounted on a wooden panel, sometimes disguised beneath a brass plate etched with floral motifs. Unlike the drawing room's theatrical lighting or the kitchen's utilitarian switches, the library's electric toggle was treated with a kind of reverence, and often trepidation. After all, the library demanded a particular mood, contemplative, calm, and above all, undisturbed. A sudden flick or hum risks shattering that delicate balance. You can almost hear the whispered protocols of the time. Switch with care, an etiquette manual might say, lest you disturb the reader or awaken the slumbering mind. Servants were instructed to operate these switches silently, some even training themselves to suppress the usual click, preferring soft toggles or strings to control the light remotely. There's a quirky anecdote about a particularly meticulous scholar who installed what he called a mute switch, a contraption involving felt padding, and a spring mechanism designed to eliminate any noise. It was said the invention was so effective that visitors sometimes questioned whether the room was lit by magic or not at all. Historians still debate whether such devices were common or merely eccentricities of the obsessed. But what's certain is that the library's electric switch embodied a tension between modern convenience and a desire to preserve timeless tranquility. The lighting itself in libraries was a puzzle. Too bright, and the glare would bounce off pages, causing eye strain. Too dim, and the words blurred into shadow. Many owners experimented with amber-tinted bulbs or adjustable lampshades to find the perfect reading glow. Lady Penelope Ashcroft famously commissioned a set of custom book lamps designed to focus light directly on pages without disturbing nearby guests. Another curious detail. Some libraries installed separate switches for different shelves, allowing readers to illuminate only the section they needed. This level of control was revolutionary, but also invited social commentary. Did choosing to light a specific shelf imply favoritism or intellectual hierarchy? Did it subtly exclude others from the collective experience of the library? Fashion here took on a scholarly seriousness. Reading glasses were designed with tinted lenses to reduce glare from electric bulbs, and some even sported soft leather gloves to protect delicate pages while adjusting switches. It sounds fussy, but in a time when every detail mattered, these small gestures reflected the high value placed on propriety. One fringe story from a Yorkshire estate tells a governess who was so alarmed by the electric switch's sudden brightness that she refused to use it after dusk, preferring candlelight even during study hours. The family tolerated this as a quaint eccentricity, but it underscores the emotional baggage carried by these simple toggles. Libraries also became testing grounds for the emerging field of electric hygiene, a phrase coined by early 20th century doctors concerned about the effects of artificial light on human health. They recommended breaks from electric illumination to avoid mental fatigue, a diagnosis as vague as it was fashionable. So when you next find yourself in a dimly lit room filled with books, pause and consider the switch. It's not just a mechanism, but a symbol of an era caught between tradition and modernity, where light was carefully curated and silence fiercely guarded. You reach out to the switch, mindful of the histories tangled in its simple flick. The light responds softly, inviting you to lose yourself in the quiet glow and the endless worlds between the pages. From a quiet sanctuary of the library, your footsteps carry you into the servants' quarters, a world often hidden behind heavy doors and discreet stairways. Here, the electric switch was less a symbol of elegance or social anxiety, and more a tool intertwined with labor, hierarchy, and survival. Imagine a cramped room lit by a single bulb swinging on a fragile wire, its switch a modest toggle on the wall, worn smooth by the hands of many. The servants' quarters were rarely the focus of glamour. Electricity arrived here later than in the main house, and when it did, it came with a mixture of relief and suspicion. For servants, the switch was a marker of changing times. It promised longer hours of work without the dangers of open flames, but also threatened to erode traditions and roles long held sacred. Some elder servants lamented the fading rituals of lighting lamps and tending fires, tasks that gave rhythm and authority to their day. One particularly interesting custom emerged around the switch. Servants developed an unspoken code to avoid using the electric light unnecessarily, fearing the household account might notice the rising bills in cut hours or wages. Some even rigged timers or concealed switches to limit usage without inviting suspicion. Historians still debate whether this was a widespread practice or isolated pockets of resistance, but letters from servant diaries suggest it was more than occasional. One footman recorded his attempts to beguile the electric eye with candlelight shadows, creating the illusion of darkness even while the bulbs glowed faintly. And then there was a matter of fear. Despite the gradual acceptance of electricity, some servants genuinely feared the switch. Stories of electric shocks circulated widely, some exaggerated, others based on real minor incidents, but all feeding into a cautious relationship with the technology. One quirky tale recounts a kitchen maid who refused to touch the switch until a fellow servant demonstrated by flicking it repeatedly with no harm. The event became a small celebration, easing fears and fostering camaraderie. The servant's electric switch also reinforced social hierarchy in subtle ways. In many houses, the switches in servants' rooms were basic and utilitarian, while those in the family's quarters were ornate and even concealed. This physical difference mirrored the social divide, reminding all who passed which world they inhabited. Fashion in the servants' quarters was practical. No embroidered cloaks or electric-ready gowns here. But even the fabric of their uniforms adapted. Some employers mandated darker, less flammable materials as a safety precaution against accidental electrical fires. A fringe note: some servant quarters had dummy switches to fool inspectors or visitors into believing the staff enjoyed the same modern conveniences. Whether this was protective measure or mere vanity remains debated. The impact of electric switches on servant life extended beyond lighting. It symbolized a slow march of modernization that would, over decades, transform domestic service itself. Fewer manual tasks, longer hours, and the gradual disappearance of the fire-tending role meant servants had to adapt or risk obsolescence. You stand in this modest room, fingers brushing the switch's surface. It's a simple button, yes, but it carries the weight of countless untold stories of fear, adaptation, resistance, and quiet revolution. As the light glows steadily, you imagine the voices of those long-gone servants, their hopes and anxieties flickering in the bulb's soft illumination.